What happens when a beloved soap opera star sits down for what should be a friendly chat about his latest projects, only to find himself under attack from a host who seems determined to tear him down? Today we're diving into one of the most shocking moments in daytime television history, when Mark Consuelos found himself in an unexpected battle of words that left everyone stunned. You won't believe how this interview spiraled out of control, and the moment that made Mark finally say, "Enough is enough." Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below because this story will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about live television. The morning started like any other at the View studio. Mark Consuelos arrived with his usual charm and professionalism, ready to promote his new drama series and share some lighthearted stories with the panel. He had been on the show multiple times before, always enjoying the playful banter and warm reception from the hosts. Today felt different from the moment he walked onto the set. Well, look who decided to grace us with his presence," Joy Behar said as Mark took his seat, her tone carrying an edge that immediately caught everyone off guard. The audience laughed nervously, unsure if this was her typical sarcastic humor or something more pointed. Mark smiled politely, adjusting his jacket as he settled into the guest chair. "Always a pleasure to be here, Joy. Thanks for having me back." "Oh, we're thrilled," Joy continued, shuffling through her note cards with exaggerated movements. "I'm sure our audience is just dying to hear about your latest project. Though I have to wonder, Mark, don't you think you're spreading yourself a little thin these days? I mean, between the acting, the producing, the constant social media presence, when do you actually have time to perfect any of these crafts?" The question hit like a slap across the face. The other co-hosts exchanged glances, clearly not expecting Joy to come out swinging so early in the interview. Mark's smile faltered for just a moment before he composed himself. "I think staying busy keeps me sharp, actually," Mark replied diplomatically. "I'm passionate about storytelling in all its forms, and I'm fortunate enough to work with incredible teams that make juggling these projects possible." Joy leaned back in her chair, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. Passionate about storytelling, or passionate about staying relevant? Because let's be honest here, Mark, soap operas aren't exactly the cultural powerhouse they used to be, are they? Some might say you're trying a little too hard to reinvent yourself. The studio fell silent except for the hum of cameras. Even the production crew seemed to freeze, sensing that something was going very wrong very quickly. Mark's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his media training kicked in. "I have tremendous respect for the soap opera genre," Mark said, his voice steady but with a new firmness. "Those shows taught me discipline, how to work under pressure, and how to connect with audiences on a daily basis. I'm proud of that foundation." "Foundation, sure," Joy interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "But don't you think it's time to admit that you're basically riding on Kelly's coattails at this point? I mean, let's call a spade here. Without your wife's morning show success, would anyone really be calling you for these primetime gigs?" The question landed like a bomb in the studio. Several audience members gasped audibly, and one of the co-hosts actually put her hand to her mouth in shock. Mark's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, hurt, and then something much colder. "Excuse me?" Mark said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. Joy either didn't notice the warning signs or didn't care. "Come on, Mark, we're all adults here. Your wife has built an empire. She's a household name. She has real influence in this industry. You're, what, the supportive husband who gets thrown a bone every now and then? There's no shame in that, but let's not pretend this is all about your individual talent." Mark sat perfectly still for a moment, his hands clasped in his lap. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled but carried an unmistakable edge. "Joy, I came here today to talk about my work, my projects, and my experiences in this industry. I didn't come here to be disrespected or to have my marriage used as ammunition for whatever point you're trying to make." "Oh, disrespected?" Joy laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Mark, this is The View. We ask real questions here, not softball celebrity puff pieces. If you can't handle a little scrutiny about your career trajectory, maybe you should stick to the more controlled environments where they let you play pretend." The tension in the room was now palpable. Camera operators were getting tighter shots, sensing that they were capturing something unprecedented. Mark's co-hosts were looking increasingly uncomfortable, but Joy seemed energized by the conflict she had created. "You know what, Joy?" Mark said, leaning forward slightly. "I've been in this business for over 2 decades. I've worked with incredible actors, directors, and writers. I've earned every role I've gotten through preparation, professionalism, and yes, talent. The fact that you would reduce my career to some kind of nepotism scheme says a lot more about your perspective than it does about my abilities. Joy's eyes flashed with something that looked almost like glee. 2 decades of what, exactly? Playing the same brooding character type over and over again? Mark, let's be real about your range here. You've got one speed, handsome and intense, and you've been milking it since the 90s. At what point do we acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, you've hit your ceiling? The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Mark stared at Joy for a long moment, and something fundamental shifted in his expression. The polite, media-trained facade was cracking, revealing something much more authentic and much more dangerous underneath. Mark's voice, when he finally spoke again, carried a weight that made everyone in the studio sit up straighter. You know what's interesting, Joy? I've been nothing but respectful to you and this show every time I've been here. I've answered your questions honestly. I've played along with the jokes, even when they weren't particularly funny. But right now, you're not interviewing me, you're attacking me. Joy scoffed, but there was something in Mark's tone that made her defensive posture shift slightly. Attacking you? Mark, please. I'm asking legitimate questions about your career. If you can't handle that level of professional discourse, then maybe television interviews aren't for you. Professional discourse? Mark repeated, his eyebrows raising. Is that what you call questioning my talent, dismissing my work, and suggesting that my marriage is the only reason I have a career? Because where I come from, that's called being deliberately cruel. The other co-hosts were now visibly squirming in their seats. One tried to interject with a gentle, maybe we should move on to talking about the new show, but Joy cut her off with a sharp gesture. Cruel? Oh, that's rich, Joy continued, her voice getting sharper. You want to talk about cruel, Mark? How about the way this industry props up mediocre white men while actual talent gets overlooked? How about the way some people get handed opportunities they haven't earned while others fight for scraps? But sure, let's worry about hurting the feelings of someone who's never had to struggle a day in his privileged life. Mark's eyes widened slightly, not just at the words but at the venom behind them. Privileged? Joy, you don't know anything about my life, my background, or what I've had to overcome to get where I am. You're making assumptions based on what, exactly? The way I look? The fact that I'm married to someone successful? I'm making observations based on reality, Joy shot back. Look around, Mark. Look at who gets the roles, who gets the opportunities, who gets the benefit of the doubt when they're not quite good enough. You think it's a coincidence that you keep landing on your feet? You think it's all about your incredible acting ability? The studio audience was dead silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something far beyond typical television drama. This had become personal, ugly, and completely unfiltered. Mark's hands were gripping the arms of his chair, his knuckles white with tension. You want to have a conversation about privilege and opportunity in this industry? Fine, Mark said, his voice getting stronger. But don't you dare sit there and pretend like you know my story, or like you've somehow appointed yourself the judge of who deserves what. You want to talk about people getting opportunities they haven't earned? How exactly did you earn the right to tear down a guest on your own show? Joy's face flushed red, whether from anger or embarrassment wasn't clear. I earned my place here by speaking truth to power, by not backing down from difficult conversations, by refusing to participate in the celebrity worship that passes for journalism these days. If you can't handle someone questioning your narrative, that's your problem, not mine. Questioning my narrative? Mark's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his controlled demeanor. You're not questioning anything, Joy. You're attacking me personally, you're insulting my work, and you're doing it with a smile on your face like it's some kind of public service. This isn't journalism, this is bullying with cameras rolling. Joy leaned forward aggressively, her eyes blazing. Bullying? You want to see bullying, Mark? Bullying is when people like you take spots that should go to more deserving artists. Bullying is when the industry rewards pretty faces over actual talent. Bullying is when someone gets multiple chances to fail upward while others never get a first chance. So excuse me if I'm not impressed by your sob story about being held accountable for once in your life. The words hit Mark like physical blows. His composure, which had been hanging by a thread, finally began to completely unravel. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet but filled with barely contained fury. You know what, Joy? I came here as a professional, as a guest on your show, showing you the same respect I would show any colleague in this industry. But you've made it clear that respect isn't something you're interested in giving or receiving. You want to make this personal? You want to attack my character, my marriage, my entire career? Fine, but don't pretend this is about journalism or holding people accountable. This is about you taking out whatever anger you're carrying on someone who can't fight back without looking like the bad guy. Joy's expression had shifted from smug satisfaction to something harder to read. But she wasn't backing down. Can't fight back? Mark, you're a grown man with a platform and a voice. Use it. Defend yourself. Prove me wrong. Show me this incredible talent that supposedly justifies all these opportunities you've been given. Because right now, all I'm seeing is someone who folds under the first real pressure he's ever faced. Mark stood up abruptly, the sudden movement causing his chair to scrape loudly against the studio floor. The sound cut through the tension like a knife, and several people in the audience actually jumped. The camera zoomed in automatically, capturing every nuance of his expression as he towered over the panel. "You want to see me defend myself?" Mark said, his voice now carrying real menace. "Here's your defense, Joy. I've spent 25 years in this business, building a reputation based on showing up, prepared, treating people with respect, and doing the work. I've never once used my platform to tear down another professional the way you're tearing down me right now. I've never hidden behind the guise of tough journalism to justify being cruel to someone who trusted me enough to sit in a vulnerable position and answer questions honestly." Joy was still seated, but her body language had changed. She was leaning back slightly, as if the force of Mark's words was pushing her away. "So, what are you saying, Mark? That I'm not doing my job? That asking tough questions makes me the villain here?" "I'm saying that there's a difference between asking tough questions and being a bully," Mark replied, his voice carrying throughout the now completely silent studio. "I'm saying that you've crossed a line today that has nothing to do with journalism and everything to do with whatever personal issues you're working through. And I'm saying that I'm not going to stand here and let you use me as your punching bag anymore." The silence that followed Mark's words was deafening. Joy stared up at him, her mouth slightly open, as if she hadn't expected him to fight back with such force. But instead of backing down, something darker flickered across her face, a look that suggested she was about to escalate things even further. "Personal issues?" Joy said, her voice dripping with disdain as she slowly rose from her own chair. "You want to talk about personal issues, Mark? Let's talk about how you've built your entire public persona around being the perfect husband, the family man, the guy who has it all figured out. But what happens when the cameras stop rolling? What happens when you're not performing for the public? Because I've heard some interesting stories about what you're really like behind closed doors." Mark's face went completely white. The implication in Joy's words hung in the air like poison, and everyone in the studio seemed to collectively hold their breath. "What exactly are you suggesting, Joy?" Joy's smile was cruel and calculated. "I'm not suggesting anything, Mark. I'm just saying that public personas and private realities don't always match up, do they? And maybe, just maybe, some of us are tired of pretending that celebrities are exactly who they claim to be on social media and red carpets." "You're crossing a line here," Mark said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "You're making implications about my family, about my personal life, without any basis in fact. This isn't journalism, Joy. This is character assassination." Joy shrugged with exaggerated nonchalance. "I'm just pointing out that maybe the public deserves to know who they're really supporting when they watch your shows or follow your career. Maybe they deserve to know whether the image matches the reality." Mark took a step closer to the panel, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You have absolutely no right to sit there and make veiled accusations about my family. None. You want to attack my work? Fine. You want to question my talent? I can handle that. But the moment you start implying things about my marriage, about my character as a husband and father, you've gone too far." "Have I?" Joy asked, clearly enjoying the reaction she was getting. "Or have I just touched a nerve? Because you're awfully defensive for someone who has nothing to hide." The other co-hosts were now looking genuinely frightened. One of them tried desperately to regain control of the situation. "Maybe we should take a commercial break and reset here," she suggested weakly. But Joy wasn't finished. "You know what, Mark? You came on this show acting like you're some kind of victim because I asked you a few hard questions about your career. But maybe the real question is why you're so sensitive about having your life examined. Maybe the real question is what you're so afraid people might find out. Mark's composure finally shattered completely. His voice, when he spoke, was raw and furious. You want to know what I'm afraid of, Joy? I'm afraid of people like you. I'm afraid of people who use their platforms to destroy others for entertainment. I'm afraid of people who think that tearing someone down makes them somehow more important or more relevant. Oh, please, Joy scoffed. Save the righteous indignation for someone who buys it. You're not a victim here, Mark. You're just a mediocre actor who's finally being called out for what you really are. Mark stared at her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted from anger to something that looked almost like pity. When he spoke again, his voice was steady but filled with disgust. You know what the saddest part about this is, Joy? I actually used to respect you. I thought you were smart. I thought you were funny. I thought you brought something valuable to television. But watching you right now, seeing how much pleasure you're taking in trying to humiliate me, I realize I was completely wrong about who you are as a person. Joy's face hardened. Don't you dare lecture me about who I am. You don't know anything about me, about what I've had to do to survive in this industry, about the fights I've had to fight. You're right, Mark said, nodding slowly. I don't know what you've been through. But I know what I'm seeing right now, and what I'm seeing is someone who's become so bitter, so angry, that you can't stand to see other people succeed. What I'm seeing is someone who mistakes cruelty for honesty and thinks that destroying others makes you somehow more powerful. The words hit Joy like a slap, and for the first time in the entire exchange, she seemed genuinely rattled. You don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Mark was already moving, walking around the panel toward the exit. Actually, I think I know exactly what I'm talking about, and I think everyone watching this knows it too. You've shown them exactly who you are today, Joy. I hope it was worth it. Where do you think you're going? Joy called after him, her voice rising with what sounded like panic. We're in the middle of an interview. Mark stopped and turned back to face her, his expression cold and final. No, Joy, we're in the middle of an ambush, and I'm done being your target for the day. I came here to talk about my work, to connect with your audience, to be a good guest on your show. But you had other plans, didn't you? You wanted to create a moment, to generate some buzz, to get people talking. Well, congratulations, you got your moment. He began walking toward the exit again, but Joy wasn't finished. You can't just walk away, Mark. This is live television. You have an obligation to finish this interview. Mark stopped one more time, his hand on the studio door. The only obligation I have is to myself and my family. And right now, that obligation is telling me to get as far away from you as possible before I say something I'll actually regret. Joy stood up abruptly, her chair rolling backward. This is exactly what I was talking about. This is exactly the kind of entitled behavior that proves my point. You can't handle real scrutiny, so you run away. Mark looked at her one last time, and when he spoke, his voice carried throughout the entire studio with crystal clarity. Joy, I've handled real scrutiny my entire career. What you did today wasn't scrutiny, it was a hit job. And the fact that you can't tell the difference says everything anyone needs to know about your credibility as a journalist. With that, Mark Consuelos walked out of the View studio, leaving behind a panel of stunned co-hosts, a shocked audience, and Joy Behar standing alone, her face flushed with anger and something that might have been shame. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every second of the aftermath, as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in for everyone involved. The silence that followed was unlike anything The View had ever experienced, and it would be talked about for years to come as one of the most shocking moments in daytime television history. What did you think of this incredible confrontation? Have you ever seen a celebrity stand up for themselves like this on live television? Subscribe for more unbelievable entertainment stories and comment below with the most shocking celebrity interview moment you've ever witnessed.